current Daf Mesech Taanis Daf Yomi. We begin 3 lines down at the top of the Yomim. We continue the discussion of the previous Daf, discussing what happens in a famine year, and because of the topic, obviously, of our parak, our Mesech, regarding when it doesn't rain. Sure, it corresponds because of the Cheskel, Taanis and Daf Yomi, Hashem joining us for today's Daf. Some ideas we're going to discuss in today's Daf are continuing what we spoke about how to act when traveling, which is related to the idea of how much you win during a famine, how to act during a famine, joining in the suffering of the community when there's no food to go around, whether voluntary fasting is praiseworthy or actually a sin, in what situations an individual recites Anenu in davening, and using jugs that non-Jews store their wine in, if and when it's permitted or not. Some important terms and concepts are don't separate yourself from the public. If everyone's doing one thing, you shouldn't separate. And Anenu is the prayer we say in Shemona Esrei on a fasting. So we had mentioned the previous stuff that if someone's traveling, you shouldn't eat more than there is in the famine year. We had 2 interpretations, either because it's to avoid stomach trouble, or because Mazaini, make sure his food will last. And we said the difference was 2 interpretations, either because when he's traveling on a ship, so he still needs to make sure his food lasts, but he doesn't have to worry about because he's not really walking. And we said the Kazma Avna is going from one town to another, where there's an inn in each place, so there's no worry about running out of food, but here he might hurt himself by overeating. On that, the Gemara continues, 3 lines down at the top of the Yomim. I'm going to read the Merav. It says, Kol amar v'atzmai b'shnei ra'avai. Whoever starves himself in a famine year, nitzal memisa mishuna. He's saved from a distorted death. Meaning, if he dies by the sword or in the famine, any death that doesn't come through the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, like a person who dies on his bed, that's called a Misa Mishuna. So if a person starves himself in the famine year, he's saved from a Misa Mishuna. Kashnem, it says a pasuk in Eir, B'ra'av in a famine, Padcha Mimavis, he redeems you from death. Now, the question is, it's Meira Mibayle. It should say, from the famine, he redeems you from death. What's in the famine? Rather, this is what the pasuk is saying. In the reward that he's starving himself in the famine year, when the Jewish people are in pain, he's joining in the pain. So it's not Meirav, it's Beirav, it's because he's starving himself. Hashem is Patchim Hashem redeems you from a Misa Mishuna, from a distorted type of a death. Now, continuing on this theme again of being mitzar yourself with the tzibur, so Amr Shlakish says, it's forbidden for a person to have marital intimacy in a famine year because a person has to conduct himself in a situation of pain and not just to delight himself when there's sorrow going on in the world. Somebody says in Pasuk Bereshis, Yosef Yalad Shnei Banim, and to Yosef is born 2 sons, B'terem Tavish Nasarav, before the years of famine came, because during the years of famine, he's not having children. Now, Taisa asks an interesting question. He says, what's with Yecheved? We all know Yecheved was born Bein HaChaimos, and that was the time of famine. And obviously that she was impregnated in a famine year. So how could that be? So Taisa says, interesting, he says, it's not that it's actually also for everyone. It's only for who wants to conduct themselves in Chasidus. Yosef was a Chassid, he didn't have intimacy, but other people actually did. So that's what the Korban Pesach, because Yecheved was not Ben Chamis and it was during the time of famine. Now, Tana, however, we learn in the Braisa, which this is B'chlal, an exemption that's used oftentimes in Halacha, Chasuchi Banim, those who are lacking children that didn't fulfill yet the mitzvah, Pirvarivya, Mishavshem Miteisein Mishnei Oven, they do have marital intimacy even during a famine year because of the mitzvah of Pirvarivya. It's not just one of delighting themselves, it's something that has a mitzvah, and therefore they're allowed to. Continuing on this theme, turn up on the Braisa. Bisman Yisrael Shur Mitzar, when the Jewish people are in pain, and one of them separates himself. So the 2 these ministering angels that escort every single person, one on his right side, one on his left side, like the Pasuk says in Tehillim, every person has a malach on one side and a malach on the other side. So those 2 angels come along, they put their hands on his head, and they say, this person who separated himself from the public, he should not see with the consolation, with the salvation of the public. Similarly, trying to learn another brayso, when the public is in pain, a person shouldn't say, I'm going to go home, I'm going to eat, I'm going to drink, and peace upon you, my soul, that me it's going good. I don't care what everyone else is going through a difficulty. The Moitzikin, if he does, there's a love regarding him. The pasuk says in Yeshaya, "Behine sasmas," behold, there's joy and there's happiness. Harig bakar, killing cattle, v'shachat sayin, and slaughtering sheep. Achal basa v'shasas yain, he's eating meat and he's drinking wine. Achal v'shasas, eating and drinking. Ki machanamas, because tomorrow we're gonna die. Who cares? Let's enjoy ourselves. Max Basrei. What does it say after that? It says v'nigla ba'aznai, and it's revealed in my ears. Hashem Tzavakar, says Hashem, the Lord of Hosts. Until if you're going to get atonement for the sin, until you're going to actually die, yeah, you're going to die because they're not joining in the tsar of the rabbi. Now, Adkan mitzvah bein. This is what's called a halbvegs. This is only half of a problem. This is the intermediate people because at least they're afraid from death. They're saying, oh, because tomorrow we're going to die. As if you're afraid of death, let's chaparine now. But what does it say about the wicked? It says in Yeshaya, he saw you come. I'm going to take wine. I'm going to buy hard liquor. Like today will be tomorrow. They're even worse. They're not even afraid of death. They're talking about already tomorrow that they're going to have already that party. So what does it say after that? It says Hatzadik Ovid, the righteous is lost. And no one's paying attention. Why did the righteous die? It's because of the wickedness that the righteous have passed away, so that he should not be pained with the evil. Or another interpretation is, because of the wickedness of these people, the tzaddik dies, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want that the tzaddik should be mavakish rachamim for the wicked. So that's why the tzaddik passed away. El Rabbi Yitzhar Adam Matzibur says the Gemara, no, a person should paint himself with the tzibur, as some Gersais in the Gemara have, as mine is brought, about tzaddik gomer tzarchel tzaras imatzibur. Even a totally righteous person has to paint himself with the tzibur. She came into Moshe Rabbeinu, like we find by Moshe Rabbeinu. Shatzir atzma imat tzibur, he painted himself with the tzibur. Shneim, like it says in pasuk in Shemai, it says V'idei Moshe kavedim, and when they're fighting Amalek, so Moshe Rabbeinu was out there and he had his hands stretched out and his hands were heavy. So he took a stone and they put it beneath him, and Moshe Rabbeinu sat on the stone. It was hard for him to stand with it holding his hands up. Remember we used to go jogging, they say hold your hands up high, it's good for heart. It's very hard to do that. So he sat down. And the question is, Moshe didn't have one pillow, one blanket to sit, he had to sit on the rock. Since now they're fighting in a war, the Jewish people are going through a difficulty. Moshe is going to go through the difficulty with them. In other words, it's not stam saying, oy nabuch, that's sympathy. You have to have empathy. You have to actually feel it. You have to, when the wife's pregnant, you have to put on those pregnancy suits they put on. You actually have to feel the pain. You have to sit on the rock. It's not enough to say, oy nabuch, what they're going through. You have to be mishatev imoy im the tsar. Now, whoever paints himself with the tzibur, he merits and he sees the consolation of the public. Now, maybe someone's going to say, me maybe. No. Who's going to say anything about me? I'm home, I have a nice house. You know, it's Corona, people are going through difficulty. Who's going to say? No one needs. Today you can't say this anymore. But Amal, at least in Talmudic times, you could say, who's going to say anything? Says the Gemara, and this is mamish what we have today. Is Avnei Beis Shalom, yeah, we taka have. With all the cameras everywhere. But the stones of a person's house is going to testify. Because there's Beis Shalom, and the beams of a person's house is going to testify against the person. They're me'idim by Shalom says the pasuk in Chabakuk. Ki even mikir tizar, because the stone from the wall screams out. The chafis, which is this half a brick, which they used to put between two rows of wood, like a half a brick, me'etz yanena, from the wood will call out, yeah, your own house is going to come and testify against you. Says, yeah, the mensch. When they were going through difficulty, he was enjoying himself. Debate of Shilamri, he says a different interpretation. He made the love. You're two malachim that are always following you, one on the right, one on the left. They're going to testify. Shemek said the pasuk in Dillim, ki malachav, because his angels yitzav. He commands to you to testify against you. Another interpretation of the Chid Koimi says, a person's own soul testifies of him, which is one of the sources that the neshama is not you, the body's not you, and who is you? That's a good question. But you are actually the connection of the neshama and your good. But the neshama will testify against you. Shemach says the pasuk Micha, from that which lays in your bosom, meaning in your chest, shmor pischei picha, be careful from opening up your mouth. Which the Gemara Chagiga actually adds on the words. And what's the thing? What the rest of that is in the neshama. That's your own soul is going to testify against you. Yes, some say a person's own limbs will testify against them. Again, it sounds like that's not you. Those are your limbs. Shouldn't like the pasuk in Yeshaya. It says, "Atem Eidai, you are my witnesses," in the plural. So that's the limbs. Num Hashem says Hashem, which the limbs are going to testify against the person for not being mishatev imay imatzibah. Now the pasuk says in Devarim, Kele Muna, a God of faithfulness, ve'ein avol, and there's no perversion. What does this mean? Sounds like one is like a positive and one is saying not a negative. Kele Muna and not avol. So not the Gemara explains like this. Kele Muna, the God of faithfulness, is just like Hashem punishes from the wicked in the world to come. Even a small, you think whatever this guy's, who knows, done chama. Don't think every small little thing is going everything, even for a small avera that they do. So too Hashem punishes the righteous in this world for even a small avera that they do, and that's regarding the faithfulness. Now ve'in avol, and there's no perversion, is the other way. Just like Hashem pays the hefty rewards for the righteous in the world to come, even a small little lichta mitzvah, you didn't think twice about it, it was such an easy mitzvah that you get reward for. So Hashem gives the reward for the wicked in this world, even for a small mitzvah that they do. Now, why does Hashem do that? Why does He pay them handsomely in this world? To chase them away from the world to come. It says in the pasuk at the bottom, "Umishal l'sayin of el panav." Why does Hashem pay up His enemies to their face? Is to wipe them out. So that's what it means, ve'ein avol, that Hashem doesn't do anything without justice and truth and righteousness. That's what ein avol means. Now the end of the pasuk is tzaddik v'yasheru. Hashem is a tzaddik and He's straight. What does that mean? What's tzaddik v'yasher? So Rashi explains, tzaddik is that he's mastik the din on tzaddikim. We know tziduk adin is always when you're justifying the din that was meted against a person, which is that they get a punishment. And also he does yasher, he does good and straight with the wicked to pay up all their merits in this world, to chase them away from the world to come. Now Amr, they said, when a person passes away to the house of his world, which is also an important yesod, it says in the individual, because everyone has their own olam, and that's your whole eternity really is your own self. That is nothing more, nothing less than becoming who you're supposed to be. So when the person passes away to the next world, kol maisav niftaren lefanav. So it's interesting that all of a person's actions pass in front of him. Modern day cricket. So when a person passes away, kol ma'asav niftar lefanav, all his actions pass in front of him. It's so fascinating if you think about it in a certain context, that everything you do will ultimately pass in front of you. And they tell him, kafa kafa sisa, this and this is what you did. B'makam pleni at that place, b'yom pleni in that day. He says yes. You tell him, chasain, sign. And he signs. Somebody says the pasuk in here. B'yad kol adam yachtim. We know this. We say in Yom Ram, in the hand of every single person, it's signed. Meaning they write all the actions of a person, and the hand signs on every action that he did. Not only that, actually, the own person justifies the judgment that's meted out against him. Rambam tells him, you judge me well. The Kaim Hashanema, it says the pasuk in Tehillim, L'man tistak b'dovrecha, that it should be justified with your words, that you show him that the person agrees. Usually the person will say, no, it's not true, this and that, and the person realizes, it's exactly what happened, it's exactly what I did, and I'm deserving of that judgment. Now going back to the primary theme of our Daf in our Masechta over here, regarding the halachas of fasting, of a Taanis, and regarding what we're discussing about being a chayte, so much more. We have an interesting discussion. Kol yeshu b'Taanis, whoever sits and they fast. So the machlok is if that's a good or not a good practice. So Shmuel says it's nikkur chayte, it's called a sinner. Why is it called a sinner? So the Gemara says, Tana, he holds like the Tana, which is the machlekes, if it's actually good or bad. The Tana learned a brayso. Loz hakav Rabbi Shloimy, he says that Matam Olema was a teacher us in the pasuk in the midbar, the chipro love, and they're going to atone for him, mashachata ala nefesh, just that he sinned regarding a soul. Now this pasuk is talking by a nazir. So the question is, what soul did the nazir sin? Like Rashi says, who did he kill? That you're calling him a sinner against the person's soul? Ella, it's a famous drasha. He pained himself from the wine. Like Rashi has no mitzvah to pain yourself, as the Gemara says in Harius Daf Yomi Beis. If a tzaddik eats in this world, is he hated for that? Like what's a great? Hashem made a beautiful world. He gave delicious wine, and why you pain yourself from the wine? So he's called a chayte. Is one of the biggest ideas they talk about, that the world was given for pleasure, and even in this world Hashem wants you to enjoy. And a person called a sinner if he holds back from wine. No, so it's a kabbalah. All he did was hold himself back from wine. He's called a sinner. Called David. So someone fasts and he paints himself from enjoying anything. All the more so that he's considered a sinner, and that's what Shmuel is going like. The Taisus finds it difficult because when Rabbi comments on the Alpha and Beis, the Gemara brings also Bein She'alacha, which comes up for elective surgeries. That's the primary sugya. Someone wounds himself, he's allowed to. But others that wound him are liable. The Gemara explains over there, what does it mean wounding yourself that you're allowed to? So Shmuel says, Taanis, because you're harming yourself, your body, when you're not eating. So obviously it sounds like the Shmuel holds that if you sit and you fast, you're not called a chayte, because you're allowed to. So how could he say over here they called a chayte? So he says important you say. So most definitely you're a chayte, as he says over here, kavachem from nazir. So a nazir only paid himself from wine, all the more so someone that doesn't eat anything the whole day. But the mitzvah that the taanis is being done is bigger than the aveira from painting himself. Because the mitzvah to take a net, like the Gemara says in Seit, the well-known drasha, harei seitable kukula, yasdatz b'nayayin. But there's still a chet. Just like we find that if someone makes a taanis chalam on Shabbos, which they tear up his gezar din on bed for 70 years, but he still has to fast for fasting on Shabbos. So it's still a chet. So that's really what, on some level, they say das Torah is what das Torah. Everyone knows everything to a certain extent, but das Torah knows what's bigger than the other thing. How to choose, this over that. And that's the same thing over here, where Shmuel holds it is a chet. At the same time, he holds you allowed to do it because it's still a bigger mitzvah than the other that you're doing, but it's still considered as a chet. But that's what Shmuel's like. But it's a machlekes. Rabbi Shloimy says no. He disagrees. He says nikul kaddish. If you fast, you're called holy. Something it says in pasuk in Midbar. By the nazir, it says kaddishi. He's going to be holy. Gadil pera sadoishay. And he grows his hair long. Now, here, if he's only paying himself on one thing from wine, nikul kaddish, he's called holy. Called davar. So if he paints himself from everything, he doesn't eat at all. All the more so that he's definitely going to be called as holy, which it's because it's going back on the beginning of the pasuk where it says kadashiyah, and the reason for this is because he's purging himself from all the sins that he's fasting. Now the Gemara asks on each one, what do you do with the other one's pasuk? Well, the Shmuel that holds that you're a sinner, kaddish, but it says kadashiyah is going to be holy. So the Gemara nahu agidul perakai. That's not going on the person. It's going on the growth of the hair. That is called kaddish, because his hair is forbidden to have benefit from it, like hektish. But him himself is not called kaddish. Says the Gemara Rabbi Lazar that holds that you called kaddish or nikul chayte. What do you mean? We see he's called a sinner. We see that it says that b'chipol ha'mashal chata ala nefesh is considered a sinner. Says the Gemara, no, who the song nafshe? That's actually, if you look at the Pasham Shad in that pasuk, the Targum on Mashachat al Nefesh is going, he was sinned because that's when the Nazir became Tameh, has to bring a carbon. The Chat al Nefesh is not going on a regular Nazir. He became Tameh, so he sinned regarding coming in contact with a Nefesh, with a mess. He needs a kapara for that sin to become a Tameh. But being a Nazir itself is not a sin. To the contrary, Rabbi Lazar, he's called Halig, he's holy for having fasted. But then the Gemara asks in general, did Rabbi Lazar really say this, that the fasting called the Kaddish? But Rabbi Lazar said, a person should always evaluate himself. He should always qualify himself as Getintam days. As if there's holiness that is dwelling inside his stomach. What does that mean? Like Rashi says, as if his whole stomach is holy. which is how you're supposed to look at your body, and you're not supposed to weaken it. Like it says a pasuk in Isaiah, it doesn't make it sound like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is inside your stomach. Grace tzaddikim, the stomach is a heilige avodah, and you're not supposed to weaken it. Like it's a pasuk in Isaiah, but kir b'cha kadosh, inside of you is holy. In other words, you're not allowed to fast. Over the year, it says Hashem, I'm not going to come into the city, which we're dashing in just the first part of the pasuk of where it says b'kir b'cha kadosh. But the simple understanding of the pasuk is because there's holiness that's in pain. So Hashem says, I'm not going to come to the Ir Shalmala until I build the Yerushalayim Shalmata. But it's just an illusion. But one thing we see, Rabbi Elazar holds it's not good to fast. How could he say, if you fast, you call Kaddish? You see, Rabbi Elazar himself says, you're not supposed to fast. He says, how difficult? It depends. As an olive life, basically, is shades of gray. It's not black and white. Depends on the person that you are. If a person could tolerate fasting, certain people that have no problem fasting, Kadosh Baruch Hu praises such a person. But there's a person who cannot pain himself, he cannot tolerate fasting. He is considered as a sinner because it's harming him. So it depends on the person if it could be good or not. Now, Shloimy Schwartzberg, he says, they actually have two opposite interpretations of Rashi and Taisus in what Shloimy has told me over here. Rashi says it's going on the one who fasts. If someone fasts, Nikol Chassid is considered a pious person. What do you find? The Shloimy says the post initially. Goimel nafshay. Now, what does the word goimel actually mean? So goimel, as we know, Rashi brings from Yomei Gomel as Yitzchak, is like when you're weaning a child off for breastfeeding. So that means like pulling away, stopping. So if someone is goimel nafshay, he pulls himself away, meaning he separates himself from eat and drink. So ish chassid. So he's a person of chesed. He's considered a chassid. Now, Tais actually says the exact opposite, and this is actually one of the biggest yisaidis I have in my self-project, which is something that a person has to understand very, very well. Tais says, Goimel nafshay, someone who does gemilas chesed to his own soul, meaning that he doesn't fast, he's called a chassid. Because one of the biggest mistakes I believe people make is that they misunderstand what does it mean selfish. They think self is a four-letter word. When you take for yourself, it's not taking, it's giving. The first person you're supposed to give to is to your own self. And that's what Taisus is saying. You're goimel nafshay, when you don't fast and you eat, you're not taking from the world, you're actually doing chesed. There's two parts to a person, more than that, but basically when you're giving to yourself, you're doing gemilas chesed, and that's the first one you do kind of. When they say chesed starts at home, the first home is your own body, and that's the one you have to give to first, and therefore if you're not nesam, you call the chesed. You're doing chesed to yourself. And the pasuk continues and says, and the one who destroys his own flesh, where he fasts and it's harmful for him, so he's called, etc., as the pasuk says, achzari, he's cruel, where even your own body is the same thing. The word achzar is actually but a foreigner. And you treat your body like something foreign to yourself, you mutilate your body, that's a rasha, that's a wicked person. Because the first one you have to do chesed to is actually your own body. Now, continuing on this theme, Rabbi Shloimy says, "Hai bar beirab, the Yossi betanisa." A Talmudic scholar that sits and fasts, lechul kabel l'sheduse, let a dog eat his meal. Why? Because the fasting is not helping him. It's like as if he's fasting because he has nothing what to eat. I think Gemara is going to shortly explain. It's worse off for a Talmud Chacham to fast. He should not be fasting. And Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Ba'abi says, "Ain't time to bubble." He says there's no public fast in Bavel, meaning regarding the prohibitions of the severity of fast, is what Rabbi Yirmiyah is really coming to say, which, as we'll learn on the later daf, they treated the Taanis Daf like the halachas of mourning, of avelas, where they would stop eating before nighttime and they wouldn't wear shoes. Now, Tais says the reason why they didn't have Taanis Daf in Bavel is because they had a lot of rain. So they didn't have to make these Taanis Daf, which was all about not having rain. El Tisha B'Av, the only day that they have that they treat like a Taanis Daf, which again we do it like that with the Chamashinuyim and all that, is only on Tisha B'Av itself. I'm going to be It's just in Talmud Chacham, which you mentioned this just before. Talmudic scholar is not allowed to sit and fast. Why? Because he diminishes the heavenly work because he's weak and he can't learn. Which B'chlal, many Rosh Hashivas and Rebbes always told the Talmidim to take care of themselves, because they're engaged in Melecha Shemayim. You can't just go ahead and afflict yourself and fast and do all these things. You are holding up the world and learning Torah. You're a Talmud Chacham, therefore you cannot go ahead and fast. Now I learned going back to Halacha and Mishnah, we learned that Oichlin v'Sheisim Mishach HaShecha B'Chulu. When we're discussing in our Mishnah the first fast, there's 3 series of fasts. And there are, from the first series of fasts, we said that they would eat and drink even when it was nighttime, because the Taanis only started in the morning, like many of our Taanis. So similarly, when he says Yochid Shetibul of Taanis, if an individual accepts upon himself a fast the day before, which he says, oh, tomorrow I'm going to have a Taanis. So even if he eats and drinks all night long until the break of dawn, the next day he could make the tefillah of a Taanis, meaning he'll say the tefillah of Anenu, because again the Taanis starts in the morning. Now, however, if let's say he had a Taanis that he fasted already, and then the next night, the night after the Taanis, he didn't eat matzah Taanis, feeling on a high, didn't eat, doing all this intermittent fasting. He likes this idea of fasting. It's something he feels very light, and he sleeps the whole night for the purpose of let me fast until the morning. Let's see how far I can go. Then he could not say Anenu before, even though it's before he ate, to fulfill like as if his obligation of fasting of the nighttime. So although it's one day, like it says, but he cannot fast. He cannot say Anenu the next morning, which later on the Gemara is going to explain. What does Rav Huna hold? Why is it that you cannot say the next morning of Anenu? As the Gemara says right now, Amr Rav Yisrael. It says, Mike Sabr Rav Huna. What does Rav Huna hold? As the Gemara explains, what are the options over here? Svir lay, is it that he holds Emes Anan L'Shois, that you can't go ahead and fast for hours? Meaning, this that he says that the next morning you cannot daven a tefillah of a Taanis. The reason why you cannot say this tefillah is because the fact that you makabel this Taanis is not a kabbalah, because it's not a fast at all. Because if you wanted to sit down and eat a meal during this quote Taanis, you would have the permission to do that, because you cannot make a kabbalah of Taanis for a few hours. For example, this person who he didn't make a kabbalah of a Taanis of this night the day before, like we learned, there's lon b'tanisa. He just happened to have gone to sleep. Meaning it sounds like lon, like by itself. When it got dark and it came time for the meal, his wife prepared eggs or meat, whatever it was after the Taanis, he got up and he didn't eat. In other words, he intended to eat until, let's say, some of the night went by, an hour or 2 hours, but then he changed his mind and he slept overnight without having eaten. So you can't have a Taanis for shotlis to be considered as a Taanis to say it fills Banenu. Or maybe no. This Rabbi Huna said that the next morning you cannot say the tefillah of the Taanis is not because you cannot be mis'an l'shois. Actually, mis'an l'shois. You actually could fast for a few hours, meaning it'll be called in halacha as a Taanis. And if, let's say, you want to back out and to taste something after you started this hourly Taanis, no, you cannot. Because you have, it's the Taanis for those 10 hours, 5 hours, whatever it is. So why can't you say a tefillah of Taanis the next morning? Because he holds, if you did have a Taanis for hours, in Mispal fills Taanis. A Taanis of hours is not so significant and so stringent that you should have to be able to daven on it to tefillah of Anenu. So is it that it's not a Taanis, or is it a Taanis but it doesn't merit the tefillah of a Taanis of Anenu? Actually, Amalei Abai says like none of the options. So Islam Sabra Rav Huna, really Rav Huna holds that in general. First of all, Masal L'Shois, you could fast for hours, and also that in general, if you fast for a few hours, you could make a tefillah Anenu. So what's the pshat over here? Here it's different, where you fasted the day before, and at nighttime you slept overnight in your fasting. Yet that the ikar shoyis delilia, there are these nighttime hours that you never accepted upon yourself in own independent Taanis, the way you normally do when you're fasting for a few hours. And therefore it's not so significant that daven it Anenu because the person never went and was makabel on it initially to go ahead and make a kabbalah for this Taanis. So therefore it's lacking in the halacha of Taanis because you never accepted it. Since you never accepted it, so therefore you're not going to have this halacha. Now Taisus brings this halacha about saying Anenu, and he says from the Bahag, as our custom is, not to say Anenu b'shachas. Why not? Because you might turn out to be a liar in your prayer. because you might not conclude the Taanis, and therefore it's not appropriate to say Anenu. The Shai says, well, not a chakran. He intended to fast. And even if, let's say, Anenu happens afterwards, and he can't be Mitzar Nafshe, he's not less than someone who fasts for a few hours, and Taisus tries to be a raya. But ultimately, the halacha is that not to say Anenu. But Taisus says, as we have the minhag, the Shlich Tzibur does say it in the morning. Why? So Taisus brings to notify to the people and to remind them that there's a fast day today. Because no one's eating before Shachris, and it usually starts in the morning time. But Yachid doesn't say it from minhag. And then brackets, which is obviously not from Taisus, but it's from the Tur, Nerachayim, that's brought in Taisus, says that the Shlich Tzibur, he'll always say it in the morning because it's not possible that some of the keel is not going to fast. So you're not going to consider it a shakran because he's saying for everybody. And somewhere in the tzibur, someone is going to be fasting the whole day. So again, those are two pshatim, why the Shat says the shachars, but we don't say it up until mincha. The Gemara brings a story related to this teaching of Abaya. He went to this place Ginzik, and they asked him, Misanan l'shais, could you have a fast for a few hours? Or do you not have a fast for a few hours? So, so he didn't have the answer. They asked him another question. Kankanim, these earthenware jugs which they put wine into to store, if it's shalnachim from Gentiles, is Asturans have been to use these barrels, or are they permitted? They didn't have the answer to that either. That's my third question. What did Moshe Rabbeinu wear when he was doing the avodah, the shivas hamluim, before they made the chanukas, before they made the shmini lemalum? Now, the reason why they're asking regarding Moshe Rabbeinu is because Aaron, it says clearly they wore the big dekuna, because it says in Shmos Chates Bashta that when Moshe Rabbeinu was doing the avodah, Aaron was wearing the big dekuna. But the avodah that Moshe Rabbeinu was doing was exeris hakasa, because he wasn't the kahanim, and we don't find that he should be wearing the big dekuna. Now, but we could presume that it wouldn't have been appropriate for him to wear his weekday clothing that he goes out to the street. So that was the question: what was Moshe Rabbeinu wearing when he did the avodah shos meilim? So Lamir, he didn't have that answer either. So also Mishal ben Medrash, they came and he asked into the base medrash. Somebody they said to him as follows: they answer all three questions. His halacha is mis'an l'shayis. Yes, you could fast for a few hours, and respond to those Taanis, you could down into a Taanis, and that was like what Abaya said, that both are true. Hilchos regarding the second question is Kankam Shalnachim, the barrels of the Gentiles, after 12 months, it already loses the taste of the Yayin Nesach. So the Mutaran is permitted to use those barrels without pouring water, because within 12 months, what you'd have to do is you would have to actually, as the Gemara tells us now by the Zodav Lamagim Alf, you have to pour water for 24-hour periods 3 times in a row, and that way kasher it. And regarding the last question, the Meshtim Moshe called Zayin Me'amalum, what did Moshe Rabbeinu wear when he was doing the avodah, the Shivas Me'amalum, was b'choluk lavan, was with a white cloak of linen. It was made specially for that time in the Shivas Me'amalum. And Kanamas, he taught in the following words, it was b'choluk lavan, it was a white cloak, she'en le imra, that didn't have a hem. Why didn't it have a hem? So they shouldn't suspect him that maybe in that hem he was siphoning off and funneling out the hektish monies. The reason why is because it says in the Pasuk you have to be clean in the eyes of God and the Jewish people, and you have to make sure that no one suspects, and therefore it can never happen. Thank you to any time.